Do you know what's an absolute surefire way to ruin ice cream? You can just make a root beer float with it, because root beer's disgusting. Anytime that I see somebody order root beer, I just automatically assume that that person is from like another planet who is trying to fit in with human beings. Like they have no idea what human beings are about and they just assume that root beer is cool. I don't know. Anyways, all jokes aside, guys, in today's video, we're gonna get intense. So there may be like people getting divorced over today's video. Friendships may even end over this. Essentially, we're going to pit two of the best OMs out there. We're going to be taking a look at 5 different categories and then essentially choose a winner for each individual category, and then eventually we will arrive at a winner. I will clarify, this is my personal opinion, my personal take. There are a lot of people out there that will just value different things, and so it's just a matter of perspective, right? Like some people think that articulation is king, and then others think that accessories are king. So it's just a matter of personal opinion. Let me know your thoughts down below. Today we're going to be taking a look at Jada toys and the Marvel Legends line from Hasbro. Now I will be a little bit more clear on my Jada toys collection. As of this moment, I do own a couple of Mega Man action figures, but I have not opened those yet. So all of my expertise as far as the Jada toys line is concerned only has to do with the Street Fighter line. I believe they've only now recently entered into like the 1/12 scale realm. I think before that they were doing like die-cast toys and things of that nature. So I think it's a little bit unfair to throw Jada toys at Hasbro, considering Hasbro's been doing this for way longer. Jada toys only recently acquired the Street Fighter license and the Mega Man license, but it doesn't matter. We're going to pin them against each other, see who wins. The first category that we're going to be talking about in today's video is pretty straightforward. It's packaging, presentation. How well does the figure look in its packaging? I know this one is kind of a weird one because there are a lot of inbox collectors, but I would probably say there are way more people that just destroy the packaging. They, crack it open, display their figure. They could care less about how the box looks, but we have to account for everything. We have to look at everything when we're comparing two different OMs and deciding which one is better. And so that's what we're going to be doing here today. In terms of packaging, to me, the winner is pretty straightforward here because the Marvel Legends line has stayed pretty consistent. I actually like their mainline release boxes. You can actually see the figure. There's a clear window. However, I'm going to ding them a huge point here because there was a long period of time, I think a couple of years at least, like 2 to 3 years, where they were going away from the window packaging. So they were including no plastic in their packaging. And there were a number of reasons for this. Number one, I believe, again, this is just my personal belief. I don't know if this is accurate or not. This is pure speculation, but I think there was a tax credit somewhere in there where the government was giving them a tax break. Maybe they didn't have to pay as many taxes because they were saying, hey, we're a green company now where our packages are plastic free. And so I believe that there's some sort of incentive that the government throws out there. It's kind of like solar power. Like if there are companies or even homes that are solar powered, they usually give you like a tax break for doing that because the government is really pushing environmentally friendly business practices. And so from that end, I think it definitely benefited Hasbro. And then the other big one, which again, don't quote me on this because I don't know, I'm not an insider, but I'm pretty sure that having windows in the packaging of your action figures is actually way more expensive than not having any. However, we're collectors, and I think that's an ideal situation to actually be able to look at the figure, at least a little glimpse to see which one maybe looks better. Make sure you're getting the correct figure because, figure swapping is a thing nowadays. So I'm going to ding Hasbro here. I think Jada Toys easily wins this. I mean, that arcade style packaging that they were doing for their Street Fighter line is an absolute stroke of genius. I don't expect every OM to do this because I'm sure it's not a cheap investment, but I love that packaging. It's so nostalgic, and I think it's going to force me to come back around and potentially purchase an extra one of each character just to be able to display it in box. But even if you don't want to do that, you can actually keep the box and just display it as is because it's supposed to be an arcade. Really cool. I love it. I think this one is a no-brainer. Jada Toys wins the first category. The next category is also pretty straightforward. We're going to be taking a look at who has the best body molds, who has the best sculpt work overall, and it's very difficult really to compare both lines because they have different source material, they have different stylings, different objectives in mind. Jada Toys really came out of the gate and threw everything at the figure in terms of technological advances or any type of engineering tweaks that you could potentially add to a brand new line. You had the butterfly joints, ab crunch, you had, you know, some great ankle pivoting, you had pinless joints, which is something that a lot of the time some of the newer OMs or some of the newer manufacturers just are not able to land within like the first few waves that they have. And Jada Toys just came out with all of that in hand. But Hasbro has done the exact same thing as well. I mean, I know I've incessantly talked about the Marvel Legends Hulk body mold with those beautiful reverse butterfly joints, but I can't get enough of them. I've always said that that was kind of like an engineering marvel, really, because it wasn't something that we had ever seen. And the list goes on and on. We have the new Renew Your Vows Spider-Man body mold, the Marvel Legends Venom Buck that they've been using for quite some time, I think is absolutely brilliant. So both OMs, I think, have some very solid entries. I think it's a shame that Jada Toys up to this point hasn't given us one of those bigger figures, like the deluxe style figures, because I really feel that we would be able to, you know, really appreciate how well their action figures are designed. Because usually with like the sleeker body molds, the smaller figures, those you can kind of get away with certain issues here and there, but when it comes down to the bigger figures, you usually have to really work hard on the design, because it can't just be a gigantic statue. It still needs to be able to articulate well enough but look really big and imposing on your display. And so I really wish we had like a God or a Blanca maybe from Jada Toys, but unfortunately we do not have it yet. Having said all of that, I will say I ran into some minor issues when it came down to the body molds for some of the Jada Toys figures. Nothing major, but they were just kind of these really weird issues that I don't feel like they're going to have like 5 to 6 years down the line when they're picking up maybe more properties and just have more experience. For example, the color tone for a lot of these body molds was a little bit off, and I wouldn't count this necessarily as a part of the sculpt if it wasn't like the actual color of the plastic, right? If it was like painted on, it would be a little bit different, but it's the actual color of the body mold. And so you saw this a lot with like Fei Long or Ryu. Sometimes like the head sculpt, the skin color tone for the head sculpt was slightly different than the like chest piece or the torso, so it was really difficult to ignore. The hands as well, for I believe Ryu had some issues at the wrist, and I guess it's kind of more of an articulation issue, but it also has to do with the fact that just the molds were designed poorly, and so you can't really get a lot of wrist articulation. Sometimes if you articulated a little bit too much, the hands would actually come out. So it's just the way that the figures were designed, it's the way that the sculpts were made or manufactured. I don't think that they really took into account these minor little issues. So I'm going to give it to Hasbro just by a smidge. As I said, if we were to do this video, I think like 5 to 6 years down the line, I think Jada Toys would have perfected their marksmanship, but at the moment there's still some minor little issues here and there, and I think they definitely hold back. Not to say that Hasbro's body molds are perfect, but I think the engineer work and all of the advancements that they've done recently has definitely taken them to a tier where they may be by themselves, at least in that particular category. So in terms of body mold, in terms of sculpt work, I'm gonna have to give it to Hasbro. Moving on to the next category, we are looking at accessories, and this one also kind of difficult to really gauge, because if you really stop to think about it, Hasbro does have some releases where they throw everything at the kitchen sink in terms of accessories, but then you have others that may have like very dark obscure characters or lesser known characters, and sometimes they come with no extra accessories, just some fisted hands, no extra head sculpts, nothing of that nature. However, as I said, they have had some phenomenal releases where they do include a plethora of different hand accessories. For example, the Miles figure comes to mind, which is one of my favorite figures, the Game Reverse Miles Morales. It also includes a Build-A-Figure piece and came with like 6 hands total, 2 extra head sculpts, like an effect piece. I mean, they really went out with this figure. And that's just one example, but a lot of the Spider-Man figures do tend to come with quite a few accessories. We'll have like webbing accessories and like, 6 hands total, an unmasked head sculpt maybe. However, I will say I think Jada Toys is just a bit more consistent because all of their figures come with quite a few accessories. You'll have for example, you'll have maybe like an effect piece with a stand for that effect piece. You'll have 4 hands total and then an alternate head sculpt. And in the case of, for example, Ryu, you can actually remove the gi, which is a really cool feature. I did not expect Jada Toys to be able to do that, or to actually engineer something simplistic like that, because in most cases a lot of these OMs are able to do it. It's just not within the budget, right? They have to actually design it and do it in a very affordable way, and Jada did a phenomenal job when it comes down to that. Like I said, most of them come with I think like 4 hands, and Bison is also a perfect example. The cape is actually removable, and they've engineered it to the point where you can actually cover up the holes of where the cape goes. You can actually, I think you can put on like shoulder pads if I'm not mistaken. I don't actually own the figure. It still hasn't gotten to me, but that's another one of those figures that is really creative in terms of how they utilize the accessories. Dalsim is supposed to have like extra limbs, like extra legs and arms, like extended arms and legs. Absolutely crazy. I don't think that a Marvel Legends action figure has ever given you that much for a $25 price point. I think this one is a pretty easy victory for Jada Toys. I just feel like they consistently offer you more, whereas in Hasbro, it's really hot and cold. Sometimes they'll give you a bunch of accessories, but more often than not, they're going to leave you high and dry, just because they tend to prioritize certain figures in certain waves. Whereas in Jada Toys, it's across the board. Every single figure is going to come with a really cool effect piece, an effect stand, and then an extra head, and then probably like some extra hands. So even though you can pick and choose some action figures that have way more accessories from the Marvel Legends line, I just feel like Jada does it with almost every single figure that they have ever released. Moving on to the next category on today's list, we're going to be talking about articulation, which interestingly enough is something that you actually lose the older that you get. I never really thought too much about it, but like when you're in your early 19s or like late teens to late 20s, I would say you're like the renew your vows Spider-Man. But the older that you get, like once you hit like mid 30s, I will say you're closer to like the pizza Spidey, and then it just gets worse on from there. Anyways, all jokes aside, even though Hasbro does have some particular body molds that are slightly better, and I mean like ever so slightly better than the Jada Toys action figure line, they're not consistent. I mean, this has been an ongoing issue. I'll give you guys an example. They just re-released that retro carded Venom, and they could have easily thrown in some pins in there. They could have easily just given it a full upgrade. Instead, they give it one upgrade and still leave the consumer wanting even more. And that's a modern figure. Same thing with the newest retro carded Carnage. They already have the pinless technology. I don't understand why they continue to go to this. They also have like that double ab crunch with the like floating mid torso along with the hinge. Same thing, they're not utilizing that particular technology on all of their figures. There is still a plethora of different characters who are getting older body sculpts with pins. We've even seen some of the older female bodies being used here and there. I just don't understand exactly why it is that they're doing this. Another big point of emphasis is how quickly Jada Toys jumped into a lot of this tech. Like there are a lot of newer OMs that usually start off a little bit soft, right? Like they may not have, and you can look at a lot of Kickstarters or a lot of smaller companies, they don't have butterfly joints, or they have very limited articulation. Maybe the ab crunch isn't great. Jada Toys came out of the gates with like every bit of technological advances that you could ever ask for from an OM. I know I already touched on this, but the butterfly joints are phenomenal. They have some phenomenal ab crunch, especially Ryu, I think probably has the best ab crunch of the male bodies so far. And the list goes on. That little ball joint at the neck does just absolute wonders. And that's not something that you expect from an OM right off the bat, right? Like they're only jumping into the 1/12 scale recently. Not to mention, they're more consistent. That's been a big issue with Hasbro. Like they do have like one or two different bucks that are just absolute brilliance, but then the rest of them definitely fall short. I kind of touched on this a little bit. I think the ankles for Fei Long are a little bit weak, and the wrists for Ryu are a little bit suspect here, because sometimes when you want to articulate it a little bit forward or backwards, the hand has a tendency of wanting to pop off. It's not the end of the world, but just little minor issues like that from Jada Toys. But overall, they're way more consistent. I mean, just the body molds that we've received, and these are like their first body molds. Like these are molds that they're going to continue to reuse down the line, right? It's kind of like whenever you get the Renew Your Vows Spider-Man mold, you would assume that every figure going forward is going to use that body mold, because that's like, you know, the baseline. But Hasbro doesn't do that. They're still reusing older body molds. That's just like a guideline for the future, for maybe like the next 2 to 3 years. But Jada Toys has nothing to fall back on. I mean, this is the body molds that they're going to be using going forward, and they're really well designed. So in terms of articulation, I'm gonna have to give it to Jada Toys, even though it's a very close race. And that Renew Your Vows, and I believe, what is it, the Iron Fist body mold that they're reusing now with like the toe articulation. It's a wonderfully designed figure, but it's too inconsistent. Like we get 1 or 2 of those, and then we get a bunch of other figures that still have pins and no modern technology attached to them. So it makes no sense. Jada Toys to me is easily the winner here. And then finally, we're going to be looking at value. Which OM do I feel like gives you way more for your money? They're both around the same price point. I think Jada Toys has been retailing for $24.99 if you pick them up at like a big chain. I think if you go through the smaller online retailers, whether that's Big Bad Toy Store or Entertainment Earth, you may be paying a little bit more, like $27 plus shipping. But for the most part, this is a figure that these are figures or a line that has been at that $25 price point. I know that there are figures like Sagat and Blanca that may, you know, push the deluxe price point a little bit, but we're not 100% sure of those figures just yet. As of the moment, we only have, you know, the 6-inch action figure line. And I feel like the Hasbro line, even though there are some figures, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, there, you know, the Miles Morales, the Renew Your Vows, a lot of the 2-packs, they come with an insane amount of accessories, and there is definitely value there. And I'm going to sound somewhat repetitive here. It's inconsistent. You know, you can get one figure that's obscure with no accessories, no extra head sculpt, and then get a Spider-Man action figure that's a deluxe price point with like 10 different web accessories and like 6 extra hands and an extra head sculpt. I know I continue to go back to that Gamerverse Miles, but that's a perfect example as well. Like that one came with an insane amount of accessories and a Build-A-Figure piece. Like there's definitely value there, but it's too inconsistent. Whereas the Jada Toys, every single figure has come with an effect piece along with a stand for that effect piece, the extra hands, the extra head sculpt. I just feel like there's way more value so far from the Jada Toys line, not to mention the packaging. I mean, it's not really something that you think of when you talk about collectibles. Half the time people are just ripping the packages open, or you get them from retail and they're already damaged. But to me, it's not even close here. I think there's just consistently more value with the Jada Toys line. They have modern day technology just as good as Hasbro. They have more accessories per figure than Hasbro, and not to mention they're both paying licensing fees. It's not like Jada Toys owns Street Fighter, so they definitely have to pay their fees. They definitely have to kind of like split their money a little bit, and they're still able to give the consumer quite a bit of product. Hopefully they continue down this road, because I have absolutely been loving this line. Who's the winner? To me, it's pretty close, just because Jada Toys kind of inches out Hasbro here and there. And like I said, some people might not really care about packaging, but I think it definitely has to be taken into consideration. For me, Jada Toys is not only at this particular point slightly better than the Marvel Legends line in my opinion, but it may just be like my favorite line right now. Like they're doing phenomenal work. They're just barely getting into the 1/12 scale. I'm very excited to see what they have for us in the foreseeable future. But again, I must clarify, because people love writing long, angry comments in most of my videos. I'll clarify, this is my personal opinion, my personal take. Let me know your thoughts down below. Which one is the better OM and why? And as always, don't forget, the most important part of all of this is to enjoy the hobby. Pose your figures, play around with them, enjoy them, because sometimes we rant, we complain, and we forget that the most important part of all of this is just to enjoy the hobby. So let me know your thoughts down below. Make sure to stay tuned because we do upload pretty consistently, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you.